Constructing your own home stands as a monumental achievement in life's journey. But for me, Adeline, aged 30, this milestone was a harbinger of sorrow, marking the crumbling of my marriage. My family unit comprised my 35-year-old spouse, Yuri, and our cherished 3-year-old Sarah. The vision was clear: to erect the dwelling of our dreams. Eagerly, I shared our aspiration with my loved ones, yearning for their support, anticipating smooth progress. Yet reality proved harsh. While others may sail through such endeavors seamlessly, my path diverged. Recent times had been fraught with obstacles in materializing our dream abode, compounded by interference from Yuri's parents. The unraveling commenced on a fateful day when I entrusted Sarah to their care. Yuri and I, slaves to our professions, scarcely savored moments together in the week. Our weekends were devoured by property tours and consultations with architects. Bringing Sarah along proved futile. Her restlessness eclipsed the joy of exploration. Thus, we relied on my parents, conveniently close by, to tend to her. Then came the morning when their news shattered my routine. My father's ailment mandated a hospital visit, rendering them unable to care for Sarah. There seemed no alternative. Our plans for the day hung precariously on the edge of cancellation. Yet, in a surprising turn, my husband proposed, why not ask my parents to look after her? His suggestion stirred an unexpected turmoil within me, the prospect of discord looming. Truth be told, my relationship with my in-laws was strained. They possessed a notion that familial ties equated to unchecked liberties. Since when was such behavior permissible? Moreover, burdening them with the sudden responsibility of caring for a toddler felt intrusive. However, postponing our plans risked stalling progress on our dream home. After much internal debate, I relented, leaving my daughter in their care. Once my errands were done, I sought to ease any potential tensions, purchasing lavish treats and tokens of appreciation before returning to their doorstep. Perhaps swayed by my gestures, my in-laws welcomed us warmly, expressing gratitude for the gifts as we bid our farewells. Yet on the journey home, I overheard my daughter's innocent chatter. "I'm going to get a new house," she declared, her voice brimming with excitement, before inquiring, "Where will Grandma and Grandpa's rooms be in the new house?" "Oh, Sarah, what are you saying? Did Grandma and Grandpa ask you about their rooms? What did you tell them?" I probed gently, noticing her reluctance to speak further, her gaze fixated on the stuffed penguin cradled in her arms. "Oh no," she murmured, a hint of uncertainty clouding her features. Sighing softly, I attempted to clarify the misunderstanding. "Sweetheart, Grandma and Grandpa aren't moving in with us. Perhaps they were just curious if we have a guest room for them when they visit," I reassured her, hoping to dispel any confusion. From that day onward, my in-laws' visits became more frequent, encroaching even on weeknights and holidays. Currently residing in a modest apartment to save for our future home, their presence always seemed to revolve around our plans and aspirations. Whenever they arrived, my husband eagerly presented them with the blueprints and documents detailing our dream house, his enthusiasm unwavering despite my reservations. "Why do you always have to show them?" His question, tinged with disappointment, left me feeling guilty. But it was my mother-in-law who truly put me on edge. Her inquiries felt akin to an interrogation, each query delivered with the weight of judgment. "This design for the kitchen seems impractical. You should reconsider. And we need more tatami rooms. They're essential for comfort as we age. Also, one child's room won't suffice if you plan to expand your family. Have you thought about the declining birth rate?" Her words pierced through me like accusations in a courtroom. "Wow, definitely not the declining birth rate part," I interjected, unable to suppress my frustration. She couldn't care less about that. She was waiting for my response, Adeline. "Well, given our prior discussions and the arrangements made with our contractor, the layout is already finalized based on our family's needs," I retorted, my tone laced with annoyance. "But what about the furniture? Appliances?" she pressed further, her role as a self-proclaimed interior designer evident in her relentless scrutiny. Drawing on my experiences and observations, I defended our choices. "I've seen plenty of homes and rooms through my extensive network and discerning eye. This house, this room, doesn't meet your standards, but it's what works for us. Things aren't perfect, but we're doing our best," I countered, frustration simmering beneath the surface. Attempting to diffuse the tension with a hint of sarcasm, I suggested, "Maybe we should split the costs and make it a two-family house, since you seem to have so much input." Her reaction was explosive. Give money to our son and daughter-in-law. You're a gold digger. A two-family house. Ridiculous. With emotions running high, my in-laws left abruptly, their departure marked by bitter words exchanged in the heat of the moment. Go home. You're not my parents, you're my in-laws. I don't owe you anything. Stop acting like my bosses. I finally snapped, the weight of their intrusion too much to bear. Later that evening, after tucking our daughter into bed, my husband approached me with a weary tone. My parents are just trying to help. Try not to shut them out, he urged, a hint of exasperation in his voice. I'm not trying to shut them out, but they meddle in every aspect of our home. They always push us into corners. They treat us like puppets and mock our decisions, I rebutted, frustration seeping into my words. It's natural. They're parents. Just think about how you'd feel if it were our daughter, he reasoned, his tone softening. You know I'm not always the most compassionate person, but they need to understand boundaries, I retorted, feeling the weight of his dismissal. With his back turned to me, he fell silent, unwilling to engage further. While they may be your parents, they're not part of our household. They don't contribute financially, so they don't get to dictate, I asserted, my anger mounting at his unreasonable stance, making sleep elusive that night. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, our home was complete. Excitement filled the air as we settled into our new abode. Yet my husband's revelation shattered the tranquility. My parents are moving in today. They'll take the larger room on the second floor, and we'll take the smaller one, he declared casually. What? Hold on. We agreed one of those rooms would be Sarah's. I never agreed to living together. None of this was discussed, I protested, incredulity coloring my voice. They've already seen the room. Don't worry, they'll like it, he assured me, his nonchalant tone aggravating my frustration. Your parents have seen it too. When? I queried, my bewilderment palpable. The day before we went to see the house, he admitted casually. Wait a minute, so let me get this straight. Your parents visited the house before we did? I pressed, struggling to comprehend. Yeah, they wanted to take a look, so I gave them my key. What harm could it do? It's not like they damaged anything, he replied, his tone dismissive as he returned to wiring the TV. What harm? It's a big deal, I snapped, avoiding eye contact as I abandoned the kitchen and retreated upstairs. Locking the door behind me, I sought solace in solitude, my mind a tumult of frustration and confusion. Grateful for the distraction of tidying up after the move, I stewed in resentment toward my husband and in-laws, especially given their sudden decision to move in with us. I can't stand being around them for another minute, but we've just made a huge investment in this house. I need to keep calm, think about what I say, and consider my daughters and my future, I resolved, sequestering myself in contemplation as I awaited their arrival. True to my husband's word, they appeared early in the afternoon, unloading their belongings from a truck. They could at least greet us. They have no sense of decency. And look at this mess. You haven't even cleaned up yet. You're utterly useless, my mother-in-law criticized, her words stinging with disdain. After much grumbling, my in-laws barged into our freshly constructed home, acting as if they were entitled to do so. Eavesdropping on the commotion from upstairs, I emerged from my room and made my way to the front door. I wasn't aware that we'd be sharing our home with you as well, I stated resignedly, my tone unexpectedly icy. My father-in-law, clearly irked by my tone, wasted no time in shifting the blame onto me. I mentioned to Yuri that it shouldn't be an issue, didn't I? But it is an issue. I only found out this morning from Yuri that he invited you both to live with us, and I have no desire to reside with such disrespectful individuals, I asserted firmly. Whatever Yuri decides is fine. Are you implying you can defy your husband? He retorted. Yes, I am. Are you suggesting I'm an impertinent wife? If you don't like it, why don't you just leave? I knew this was futile. The clash in perspectives has been apparent for some time now, rendering communication impossible with these individuals. I mused silently, contemplating my next move. Before I could form a response, my husband burst in, his expression fraught with panic. Adeline, what are you doing? Don't argue with my parents. Argue? There's no parity here. I've been subjected to unilateral mistreatment simply because I'm your wife, and now you're blaming me again. Like father, like son, it seems, Yuri, I retorted sharply. I can't live with your parents, I stated firmly. Don't embarrass me. You're my wife. You're supposed to obey me, he insisted. I'm a person before I'm your wife. You can expect blind obedience, I countered, my resolve unwavering. Listening in, my father-in-law interjected angrily. I won't accept that kind of wife for you. I won't allow her in my house, he declared vehemently. To my astonishment, my husband echoed his sentiments. Being my wife takes precedence. If you can't tend to my parents, perhaps we should consider divorce. I agree with my father, my husband affirmed. Understood. Then let's proceed with a divorce, I declared resolutely, the weight of my decision hanging heavy in the air. Even as I spoke, I silently prayed that my smartphone, nestled in my pocket, was recording every word exchanged. As the reality of our impending separation sank in, my in-laws reacted with incredulity. If we're to become strangers, then return the $259,778.88 loan I provided for the house construction immediately, they demanded, their shock palpable. My husband paled at their words, his expression one of sheer horror. Calmly, I addressed the confusion. There appears to be a misunderstanding. Yuri didn't contribute a cent to the house. It was solely funded by my savings because he had none. Despite our agreement to split expenses evenly and save the surplus, he squandered money without saving a dime, I explained, laying bare the truth for my bewildered in-laws to comprehend. Oh, come on, Adeline, you can't do this, my husband exclaimed, disbelief etched on his face. It's the truth. When it came to buying the house, he wouldn't budge. He insisted it be in my name. That's why I loaned you the money, remember? I have a signed AU, so you can't deny it, I asserted firmly. Oh no, their expressions frozen in shock. I swiftly packed my suitcase and overnight bag, filling them with essentials, clothes, and my daughter's treasured toys, ensuring her favorite penguin was securely tucked under my arm. Loading everything into my Mini Cooper, I wasted no time starting the engine. With a heavy heart, I bid farewell to the house I had only just begun to call home. Hastily collecting my daughter from daycare, I sped toward my parents' house. Their surprise at my sudden appearance, clad in sweatpants and laden with luggage, was evident. If this is inconvenient or too sudden, I can stay at a hotel, I offered tentatively, but they quickly intervened, urging me to stay. I sensed their determination to shield me from harm. Sharing my plight with them, I explained my decision to leave my husband, who had nothing but scorn for me, and expressed my desire to provide a stable environment for my daughter. They pledged their full support and generously offered me a place to stay. Despite my employment, it was a lifeline I gratefully accepted, knowing I had allies in my corner. That evening, I meticulously documented every detail of my tumultuous interactions with my husband and in-laws. Saving audio recordings from my phone onto my computer and external drives, I diligently compiled evidence. Utilizing my paid time and weekends, I visited numerous lawyers, determined to find one I could trust. Eventually, I found a legal representative whom I felt confident in and submitted a formal request. My days were consumed by these tasks, and before I knew it, a week had flown by. Since the day I fled our once beautiful home, I'd been avoiding my husband, but one evening, as I left the office, he was waiting for me, though I wished to label him as my ex-husband. Until the divorce proceedings concluded, he remained my spouse in legal terms. With little to say to him, I suggested we find a public space for a conversation to avoid any potential outbursts. Ever cautious, I discreetly activated the recording function on my phone before we entered a nearby coffee shop. Is there something you want to discuss? I asked him calmly, steeling myself for whatever response he might offer. Well, it's about the house. I want you to have it, Adeline. I'll remove my name from the lease. Can't we just forget about the money? He proposed, his tone tentative. I'm sorry, I can't do it. I can't bear to live in that house anymore. Your parents, they were the first to set foot in it, weren't they? I stated firmly. Why does that matter? He countered. It matters to me, so I can't, I reiterated. Taking a sip of coffee, I scrutinized my soon-to-be ex-husband. His disheveled appearance spoke volumes, unkempt hair, stubble on his chin, and a worn-out complexion. Despite his suit, his shirt looked neglected, lacking the care of ironing or dry cleaning. I couldn't help but wonder how he was coping, but fatigue etched across his face told its own story. Adeline, please, I can't repay such a substantial sum so easily, he pleaded. You were aware of the amount. I even suggested we share ownership of the house, despite it being mine. But you refused to compromise, I reminded him. I thought it would be more like being landlords. And I didn't realize you were serious about the divorce. I thought it was just a threat, he confessed, desperation evident in his voice. I am serious. I won't tolerate such disrespectful parents sticking around, I declared resolutely. Oh no, he murmured, realization dawning upon him. I need to go. Sarah is waiting for me, I asserted, my unease palpable. I'll leave when you're finished. I'm going to take care of Sarah, my ex-husband countered, his words sending a shiver down my spine. Hastily, I retreated to my parents' house, urging them to be vigilant against any attempts to forcibly take Sarah. A few days later, a call from the daycare center sent me into a panic. A couple resembling my in-laws had appeared, attempting to collect Sarah. Racing to the daycare, I arrived just in time, thankfully having alerted the staff beforehand. They had kept my in-laws confined to a separate room, denying them access to Sarah. Yet upon my arrival, I was met with a barrage of accusations. Give me back my grandchild, you thieving cat, my mother-in-law bellowed. I'm not a thief, I retorted indignantly. If you're not a thief, you're a fraud. If you're not a thief, you're a swindler. Otherwise, how could you have amassed so much money at your age? She accused, her words laced with venom. No, all the money I lent to Yuri was my own. It's rightfully mine, a combination of my personal earnings, contributions from my parents, and a gift from my late grandmother, I clarified. A gift? My mother-in-law echoed incredulously. Why didn't you think to gift our son before your grandmother passed away? You could still do it now, couldn't you? She pressed. Caught off guard, my father-in-law let out a grunt before falling silent. My in-laws were ostentatious, valuing luxury above all else. Coming from a modest background, they lacked substantial savings or the inclination to gift large sums during their lifetime. I'm sorry, but Yuri and I are divorcing. I'll be taking custody of Sarah and raising her alone. Please refrain from visiting the daycare. It's disruptive, I informed them firmly. With that, I hurriedly ushered Sarah into the car and returned to my parents' home. Despite my warnings, Yuri and his parents persisted in their visits. Each encounter was fraught with tension, with verbal abuse and attempts to physically restrain me becoming commonplace. I recorded every instance on my phone. About a month after my abrupt departure from our new home, I instructed my lawyer to request repayment of the debt and initiate divorce proceedings. While my ex-husband initially hesitated, particularly regarding custody arrangements for Sarah, a stern reminder of potential alimony charges for contesting the matter seemed to quell his resistance. Armed with ample evidence and facing a lack of savings on their part, I pursued the repayment of owed funds and secured custody of Sarah through the divorce proceedings. It was a lengthy process, exacerbated by complications in selling the house. Initially intended for Yuri and my in-laws, financial constraints forced them to list the property for sale at a loss. After numerous price reductions, a buyer was eventually found, but the sale proceeds were insufficient to cover the initial purchase price and associated costs. Resorting to bank loans to bridge the gap, my ex-husband found himself burdened with debt and without a home, forced to return to his parents' cramped residence. Adding to their woes, Yuri's sister, also divorced, moved back in with her 2 teenage sons, exacerbating tensions in the already crowded household. The resulting chaos and constant bickering became a notorious feature of the neighborhood. With their financial struggles hindering their ability to provide adequate child support, the courts intervened to limit their visitation rights. Thus, the tumultuous family no longer posed a threat to her peace of mind. 4 years have elapsed since those tumultuous times, and Sarah, now in the 2nd grade, brings joy to our lives every day. We reside in a rented space close to my parents' home, where their support provides solace, especially on days when work keeps me late. The thought of continuing to raise Sarah with their assistance, sans remarriage, had crossed my mind. Yet unexpectedly, romance found me. I've been seeing a 36-year-old divorced man with a 1st-grade daughter, whom I often encountered during daycare drop-offs and pickups. Our casual conversations gradually blossomed into something deeper, culminating in his heartfelt confession of affection. Recently, we've been enjoying outings together, our daughters forming a natural bond during playdates. During one such outing, Sarah innocently voiced her dream of a future home where each of us would have our own space, along with a beloved family pet. Her words stirred something within me, igniting a flurry of emotions. With a proposal lingering in the air, I stand at a crossroads, carefully considering my daughter's welfare and my own desires. I realize my heart has already made its decision. I gather Sarah in my arms, her innocence a beacon of hope, and declare, yes, I do want to build another home. But this time, let's do it together as a family, ensuring everyone's happiness. My name is Ma, and until I turned 33, the most exciting event in my life was when the accounting firm I worked for switched from PCs to Macs. Not exactly thrilling, right? But then everything changed at a friend's birthday party. That night, I stood in the corner of a cramped living room, holding a soda and feeling uncomfortable in my too tight dress. The music was loud, way too loud for talking, but perfect for him, Charles. He was taller than most people, which is probably why he noticed me. He walked over with a confidence that made my heart skip a beat. Hey, you're Ma, right? His voice was clear even over the loud bass. Yeah. And you are? I sipped my drink, trying to look calm. Charles, I've seen you around. Mind if I join you? He didn't wait for an answer, just stood next to me. Not at all, I said, my voice nearly drowned out by the latest pop song blaring through the speakers. So, Ma, what brings you here tonight? He asked, leaning in. His tone was casual, but his eyes were intense. Just here to celebrate Jessica's birthday. You know her long? Yeah, went to college with her. She keeps inviting me to these things. Can't say no, can I? We laughed, and it felt natural, easy. I get it. I work with her. She's kind of hard to say no to. An accountant, right? She mentioned it. He nodded like he already knew. That's right. Numbers are my game. I joked, even though I usually found nothing funny about spreadsheets. Sounds thrilling. He grinned, and I couldn't tell if he was teasing me or not. Oh, absolutely. It's all wild parties and high stakes in the accounting world. We laughed again, and I felt at ease talking to someone genuinely interested in what I had to say. It was new, exciting, and a bit scary. You want to grab some air? He suggested, nodding toward the backyard. I nodded, grateful to escape the noise. Outside, the cool air was a relief. So, what's a guy like you doing in a place like this? I asked, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Just looking for a good time, I guess. And maybe someone cool to hang out with, he said with a smile that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. We talked about everything and nothing, movies, books we liked, how he was into graphic design but stuck in a corporate job he didn't love. It felt like we'd known each other for years. As the night wound down, he pulled out his phone. Can I get your number? I'd really like to see you again, Ma. I hesitated, not used to this kind of attention, but something about him felt right. Sure, I said, typing my number into his phone. He smiled, his whole face lighting up. Great, I'll call you. We should go out, just the two of us. Sounds good. I managed my stomach doing flips. I watched him go, a part of me still in disbelief that this was my life now. Maybe turning 33 wasn't so bad after all. Maybe it was just the start of something truly great. The days after Charles' call felt like a blur. Before I knew it, I was getting ready for our first date, my nerves all over the place since I didn't have much experience in this area. I chose a simple blue dress, nothing fancy, but I hoped it would do the trick. Charles picked me up at 7 sharp in his clean, well-kept sedan. Nothing flashy, but it suited him perfectly. As I got in, he flashed me a smile that could knock you sideways. You look great, Ma, he said. Thanks, I mumbled, probably blushing like a tomato. You look nice too. Dinner was at a cozy little French place he knew. The food smelled amazing, but my stomach was doing somersaults. We ordered pasta, him with some fancy sauce and me with plain old marinara. So, Ma, tell me something about you that no one else knows, he said, twirling his spaghetti expertly onto his fork. I chuckled, playing with my food more than eating it. Well, I'm pretty boring, but I guess not everyone knows I can solve a Rubik's Cube in under a minute. He raised his eyebrows. Really now? That's pretty cool. You'll have to show me sometime. Sure, I said, starting to relax a little. What about you? Any hidden talents? I make a mean breakfast burrito, he boasted with a grin. Best you'll ever have. I'll take your word for it. Maybe you can prove it sometime, I teased. The conversation flowed, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. We saw each other constantly. Charles would come over after work, and I'd meet him for lunch near his office. He showed me his favorite spots around town, little nooks I'd never noticed before. It was like seeing the city for the first time. Things took a serious turn when he invited me to meet his parents, Brian and Camille. They lived in a small, cozy house full of photos and little decorations. Camille hugged me the second we walked in. "Oh, we've heard so much about you, dear," she said, squeezing my shoulders. "She's lovely," Charles said, and I could tell he was pleased. We sat down to dinner, and the conversation was non-stop. "So, Ma, Charles tells us you're an accountant. That must be interesting," Brian said, passing me the potatoes. "It has its moments," I replied with a smile. "Mostly just numbers, but I like the order of it." "And how's your family?" Camille asked, genuinely interested. "They're good, thanks. My dad's a businessman, always busy, but he's been really supportive of me." It was all happening fast, but it felt right. It was as if everything in my life had been leading up to this moment, meeting Charles and feeling like someone finally saw me for who I was, not just some plain Jane accountant. One evening, a few months into our whirlwind romance, we were walking along the riverbank. The city lights reflected off the water in a postcard-perfect way. "Maud, I've been thinking," he started, stopping and facing me. "Yeah?" I asked, my heart starting to race. "I don't want to wait any longer. I know this is fast, but will you marry me?" Just like that, my world changed. No hesitation, no doubt, just a simple, "Yes, Charles, I'll marry you." The whirlwind didn't stop there. Soon after, I introduced Charles to my father. He took to Charles immediately, appreciating his straightforward manner and obvious affection for me. "He's a good man, Ma," Dad said, giving his approval, which meant the world to me. So we got married. It was a modest wedding, nothing too extravagant, but it was perfect for us. I even found myself loving the way I looked in my wedding dress, something I'd never imagined. Smiling wide, I posted photos on social media, sharing my joy with friends and family. After the wedding, life didn't slow down. It picked up pace. Charles and I barely had time to savor our newlywed bliss before he suggested something big. "Hey Ma, I've been thinking," he said one evening as we unpacked another box of wedding gifts in our cramped apartment. "How about we move in with my folks?" I paused, holding a coffee mug in my hand. "Live with your parents?" He nodded, looking serious. "Yeah, they're not getting any younger, and I'd feel better if they were around to help out. Plus, it would save us some money on rent." It made sense, but moving in with the in-laws, that was sitcom territory. "Are you sure they'd want us there all the time?" "Absolutely," he assured me. "Mom's been hinting about it ever since we got engaged. Come on, it'll be good." 3 weeks later, there we were, pulling up to his parents' house with our lives packed into a bunch of boxes. Charles's mom, Camille, was waving from the porch before we even got out of the car. "Oh, Ma, we're so thrilled to have you both here," she exclaimed, pulling me into a hug that was a bit too tight. Brian, Charles's dad, clapped him on the back. "Welcome home, son, and you too, Ma." The house was cozy, stuffed with furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum, the Museum of 1973. I tried to keep a smile on my face, but I was already missing our little apartment. Charles sensed my hesitation. "It's going to be great, you'll see," he whispered as we carried boxes inside. The first few days were an adjustment. Camille was constantly hovering, always popping into our room to ask if we needed anything. "Just making sure you're comfortable," she chirped while I tried not to cringe at the invasion of privacy. One evening, we all sat down for dinner, Charles, me, Brian, and Camille. The conversation was painfully mundane until Charles dropped another bomb. "So the house needs some major repairs," he announced casually between bites of meatloaf. I choked on my mashed potatoes. "Repairs?" "Yeah, the roof's a mess and the plumbing's from the dark ages," he said. Brian nodded solemnly. "We were thinking," Charles continued, avoiding my gaze, "that maybe we could all chip in for the costs." I glanced at Camille, who was suddenly very interested in her plate. "All of us?" "Well, I just got this pay cut at work," Charles muttered, "so I'm a bit strapped at the moment." There it was. I felt a knot form in my stomach. "I'll see what I can do," I managed to say, even though I wanted to say much more. Camille perked up, tears welling in her eyes. "Oh, Ma, that would be so helpful. You're such an angel." The next few weeks were a blur of contractors and repairs. I wrote checks and smiled through gritted teeth as Camille gushed about how wonderful the house was looking. Brian slapped me on the back. "You're really part of the family now, Ma." "Part of the family, sure, the part that pays for everything." One particularly grueling day, after yet another round of expensive renovations, I felt the strain more than ever. I felt completely drained as I collapsed on our bed, exhausted. Charles came in and sat beside me. "Thanks for handling all this, Ma," he said, sounding almost sincere. "It's fine," I lied, staring at the ceiling. "I just didn't realize how much it would be." He squeezed my hand. "It'll all be worth it. This is for our future, right?" "Our future," I echoed, not sure whose future we were building anymore. As I lay there, listening to Charles' steady breathing, I couldn't help but wonder if moving in was the right decision. But there was no going back now. I was in this deep and had to see it through, whatever the cost. After the renovations, the house looked great, like something out of a magazine. Despite the financial strain, I felt a bit of pride looking around. We decided to throw a small dinner party to celebrate, just the four of us. That's when everything took an unexpected turn. We were in the middle of dinner, laughing and sharing stories, when Camille suddenly got quiet. The room felt heavy. She looked at Brian, then at us, her eyes teary. "We need to tell you both something important," she said, her voice shaky. Charles and I exchanged looks. "What's going on?" I asked, my stomach tightening. Brian took a deep breath. "The house? It's mortgaged. Heavily mortgaged. We owe $300,000, and the bank could take it away if we don't settle the debt in 3 months. My fork clattered to my plate. "What? You mean all the repairs we just paid for?" Camille started sobbing. We were ashamed and thought we could manage it. But after the repairs and everything, there's just no way. I felt like I was in a bad dream. All the money, all the effort, and it was for a house that wasn't even secure. "So what are you saying now?" My voice was sharper than I intended. "Well," Charles started, his eyes avoiding mine. "I was hoping maybe, Ma, you could talk to your father." "Are you serious?" I snapped, my voice rising. "Ask my dad for $300,000? It's just, after his help, the house would be secure for us. For our future," Charles pleaded. Camille's sobbing grew louder, making me feel like the villain in this crazy drama. "Please, Ma, it's our home. We've spent decades in this house." I was furious, but the tears and the pleading wore me down. "I'll think about it," I finally muttered, feeling trapped. The next day, I called my dad, hesitantly explaining the situation. To my surprise, he agreed to help, but on one condition. "I'll give the money, Ma, but only with a formal agreement, a receipt. I want everything documented." When I told Charles about my dad's condition, he wasn't happy. "Why does it have to be so formal? Can't he just trust us?" "It's $300,000, Charles. It's a lot of money, and he's just being cautious," I argued, feeling the distance between us grow. "He'll get his paperwork," Charles muttered, clearly annoyed. The paperwork was drawn up and the money was transferred. Camille and Brian were relieved, constantly thanking me, but the air between Charles and me had changed. There was a coldness that hadn't been there before. Just when I thought my life couldn't get any darker, tragedy struck. "Ma, it's Kayla." A voice came through the line, shaky and choked. "Your dad, he had a heart attack. It's bad." My heart dropped to my stomach. "What? How is he?" "He didn't make it, honey. I'm so sorry." The phone nearly slipped from my hand. "No, that can't be right," I mumbled, numb. I hung up and turned to find Charles standing in the doorway. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice low. "My dad? He's gone," I managed to say before everything inside me broke and I started sobbing. Charles came over and put his arm around me, but it felt like being hugged by a stranger. "I'm sorry, Ma," he said, and it sounded sincere, but I was too lost in my grief to really hear him. Exhausted from another long day of funeral planning and dealing with the agency, I came home earlier than usual. I expected the house to be quiet, but as I inserted my key to the front door, I heard voices from the living room. It was Charles, his tone dripping with frustration and disgust, talking to his parents. "I can't do this anymore. Living with her is driving me nuts. It's too much," Charles complained. His mom, usually so sweet and understanding, replied in a stern whisper, "You have to hold on a bit longer, Charles. We need to figure out what to do with those receipts your father-in-law had. Ma has them now. The sooner I get out, the better. I'll grab those receipts and destroy them, and then I'll start all over again with that rich beauty I told you about." Charles's voice was cold and calculated. I felt a chill run down my spine. Here I was mourning my father, while the people I thought I could trust were plotting behind my back. They weren't the loving family I thought I married into. Instead, they saw me as a way to fix their financial troubles. Rage mixed with shock, but I knew I had to keep my cool. I slammed the door loudly, as if I had just come in, disrupting their scheming. "Oh Ma, you're back early. How did everything go with the funeral plans?" Camille's voice shifted instantly to one of concern, her eyes wide with fake innocence. I forced a smile, my stomach turning. "It's all coming together. Thanks for asking." As I spoke, I could see the quick glances they shot each other, their faces a mask of fake concern. It made my skin crawl knowing their true colors, but I realized that showing my cards now wouldn't help. I needed to be smart. I needed to protect what was mine and possibly even get some justice for their deceit. The funeral was somber, the air heavy with grief and murmured condolences. But as the ceremony wrapped up and we returned to Charles' parents' house, the true colors became even clearer. As we gathered in the living room sipping on lukewarm coffee, the family I married into began to show their true colors. Charles's demeanor shifted, his usual charming facade crumbling away to reveal something more sinister. With a cold laugh, he looked straight at me and dropped the bomb. "Ma, pack your things. You need to get out. I've got someone else now, someone better." His words should have felt like a slap, and I pretended to be stunned. Before I could respond, Camille chimed in with a snide giggle. "We've really had enough of you, dear. We only put up with you for your money." "What about the house?" I asked, feigning disbelief. "The house that I paid to fix. The $300,000 I poured into it." Camille laughed harder, as if I had told the best joke of the year. "Oh, sweetie, this house is ours. You're nothing here." Charles's smirk widened. "And those receipts you're so proud of? Found them in your dad's house and burned them. They're gone." For a moment, I let them believe they had won, but then I couldn't help it. I burst into laughter, my reaction confusing them, their smiles faltering. "Why are you laughing? What's so funny?" Charles demanded. I wiped a tear from my eye, still chuckling. "You three are just pathetic. You think you're so clever. The receipts you destroyed were copies. The real ones are safe with my lawyer." The color drained from their faces. Charles's arrogance turned to panic. "You can't prove anything," he stammered. "I can, and I will," I shot back, my voice steady and firm. "Now, I want my money back. All of it, or my next call is to the police." Charles and Brian looked at each other, their earlier confidence replaced by fear. Brian, usually so bold and brash, began to plead. "Ma, please, let's talk about this. We can sort something out." With the truth out and leverage in my hands, negotiations with Charles and his parents dragged on longer than I expected. It was clear they were trying every angle to sway the terms in their favor, but I wasn't about to budge. "Look, it's simple," I stated firmly during one of our many discussions at their now legally mine kitchen table. "The house gets transferred to my name in exchange for the money. That's the deal. No more games." Finally, they relented. We all agreed that the best course of action was to make everything official and legal. I insisted that everything be documented by a lawyer and confirmed with the proper papers. "I want no corners cut," I emphasized. At the lawyer's office, the atmosphere was tense as documents were signed and notarized. I watched closely as each signature was applied, ensuring there was no room for further deceit. Once everything was finalized, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I collected the documents related to the transfer and turned to Charles's mother, who looked deflated yet still carried a hint of her former haughtiness. "I'll be keeping these in a safe place," I said, holding up the papers before slipping them into a folder, just to ensure no one is tempted to pull any stunts. With the legalities handled, the divorce proceedings were straightforward. Charles was quiet, his earlier arrogance nowhere to be seen. When the final papers were signed, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. A chapter closed. On the day they moved out, I stood on the porch of my now fully owned house and watched Charles, his mom, and dad carry their belongings to a rental van. Their movements were slow, the mood somber. I couldn't help but feel a mix of satisfaction and sorrow. This wasn't how I imagined my marriage ending, but under the circumstances, it was the best possible outcome. After everything settled down and I began to enjoy my newfound peace, word got back to me through friends about Charles and his situation. Apparently, the grass wasn't greener on the other side. His mistress had dumped him not long after our divorce, and his parents were now crammed into a tiny apartment, a big downgrade from the comfortable house they once had. It seemed karma had caught up with them quicker than I expected. Despite their situation, they started reaching out to me, bombarding me with calls and messages, probably hoping to weasel their way back into my life or, at least, my house. But I was done with their deceit. I blocked their numbers without a second thought and blacklisted them on all social media. It was liberating to cut the final threads that connected us. One afternoon, as I was enjoying the quiet moment with a book in my living room, there was a knock at my door. Peering through the peephole, I saw Charles standing there, a pathetic figure holding a bouquet of flowers. The audacity of it made me scoff. Opening the door, I couldn't help but laugh outright at the sight of him. "Really, Charles? Flowers?" He shuffled uncomfortably, the bouquet seeming to wilt along with his spirits. "Ma, I've realized so many things. I was wrong, terribly wrong." "Remember when you told me I disgusted you?" I interrupted, leaning against the door frame, not hiding my amusement at his discomfort. "What changed, Charles? Run out of options?" He looked down, the shame clear on his face. "I made mistakes, but I'm here to make things right." I shook my head, almost feeling sorry for him. "Almost. You're not here to make things right, Charles. You're just desperate to get back to your comfortable life. But guess what? That life doesn't exist anymore. Not for you." His face fell, and he took a step back as if my words were physical blows. "Ma, please." "Save it." I cut him off sharply. "I want you to leave. Don't come back here. We're done. Forever." Charles stood there for a second longer, his hope visibly crumbling. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, his shoulders hunched in defeat. I returned to my book, feeling a sense of finality and relief. I smiled to myself, feeling the quiet of the house wrap around me like a comforting blanket. It was such a stark contrast to the chaos that once filled this space. The constant noise, the tension, the deceit, all of it was gone now. I could finally breathe deeply without the weight of worry on my chest. I was finally at peace, living life on my terms. I glanced around the room, taking in the calm atmosphere. The sun streamed in through the windows, casting a warm glow over everything. I realized how much I loved this house now that it was truly mine. The walls, once witnesses to arguments and schemes, now seemed to echo with serenity and contentment. I thought back to the days of turmoil and manipulation, remembering how trapped I felt. Charles and his family had taken so much from me, both emotionally and financially. But now they were out of my life for good. No bouquet of flowers or sweet talk could change that. Their attempts to manipulate me were over. As I sipped my tea and returned to my book, I felt a sense of triumph. I had faced betrayal and heartbreak, but I had come out stronger on the other side. I had taken control of my life and my future. The peace I felt now was well-earned and deeply cherished. I was truly, finally free. Free from lies, free from deceit, and free to live my life as I chose. The future stretched out before me, full of possibilities and opportunities. I smiled again, knowing that whatever came next